There's a saying in the South that goes, "Betrayal doesn't come from strangers, it comes from the hands that once tucked your hair behind your ear." That saying held no weight for Maggie Padilla, the day she gave birth to her first child. She was 32, married to Aries Padilla, a calm, steady man with a soft voice and calloused hands from years at the lumber yard in Raleigh, North Carolina. For 7 long years, they'd tried for a baby. Countless doctor visits, whispered prayers, and one miscarriage later, their miracle finally came. The hospital room at St. Francis Women's Medical Center was filled with the smell of lilies and disinfectant. Nurses congratulated her as she lay on the bed, exhausted but glowing. Her older sister Mavis Schaefer stood beside her, all gentle smiles and perfect posture, her diamond wedding band catching the light as she stroked Maggie's damp hair. "You did it, honey," she whispered. "You finally got your happy ending." Maggie smiled through tears. She didn't notice how Mavis's eyes lingered a second too long on the baby cradled in the nurse's arms. To everyone else, Mavis was the picture of grace, well off, married to an accountant, childless by choice. But behind that smile was bitterness. Her own failed IVF treatments had left scars deeper than any knife. Every family dinner, every photo of her younger sister's round belly, reminded her of what she'd never have. She'd learned to mask jealousy with charm. That night, after the nurses dimmed the lights and Aries went home to shower, the hospital grew quiet. Maggie drifted to sleep, her baby resting in a clear bassinet beside her bed. Mavis sat on the visitor's chair, staring at the newborn. Something in her snapped. She rose quietly, walked to the nursery room down the hall, and found the perfect moment. The night nurse had stepped away to answer a call. The hallways hummed with the distant echo of wheels and beeping machines. And there, lined up under the soft blue light, lay 2 bassinets, her sister's baby, and another infant, swaddled in a nearly identical blanket. Mavis's hands trembled as she looked between them. She whispered, "You'll forgive me one day," then swapped the name tags. It took less than 30 seconds. When morning came, Maggie woke to find Mavis holding the baby, smiling. "She's perfect," Mavis said, handing her the child. "You did so well." Maggie never saw the shadow behind that smile. Over the next few days, the sisters seemed closer than ever. Mavis stayed at the hospital longer than anyone else, fluffing pillows, bringing soup, taking pictures. Nurses adored her, unaware of the horror she'd planted. Before discharge, Maggie held her sister tight and whispered, "I don't know what I'd do without you." Mavis smiled again and kissed her forehead. "You'll never have to find out." Back home, Maggie settled into new motherhood, her heart bursting each time she looked into the baby's tiny face. But Argyris was the first to notice something strange, he said one evening as he rocked the child. "She's got gray eyes." "No one in my family's got gray eyes." Maggie brushed it off. "Maybe they'll change." They didn't. One afternoon, while scrolling through her photos, Maggie found one from the hospital. Mavis was in the background, near the nursery door, her expression unreadable. A chill ran through Maggie's chest, but she quickly dismissed it. After all, Mavis was her sister. "She pretended to comfort me after birth," Maggie would later say, her voice breaking on camera, "but now I know what that comfort really meant." The first crack in her peace had been struck, but the real earthquake was still coming. By the 2nd month, the Padilla home on Maple Ridge Lane had settled into a rhythm: bottles sterilized by dawn, lullabies by night, and exhaustion hanging heavy in the air. Maggie tried to find joy in the blur of diapers and feedings, but beneath her smile lived a quiet unease. She loved her daughter, no question, but each time she looked into those gray eyes, a strange hollowness stirred in her chest. The baby's features were delicate, unfamiliar. Her husband Argyris brushed off her worries. "You're just tired, Maggie. Babies change all the time." She wanted to believe him, but when her mother-in-law stopped by one afternoon and cooed, "Well, she doesn't look like a Padilla at all, does she?" Maggie felt a sting she couldn't name. Still, Mavis was there, always there. She'd visit unannounced, arms full of gifts, her perfume filling the nursery. "You're doing amazing," she'd say, taking the baby as if she owned her. She'd hum softly, the same lullaby she used to sing when they were kids. Maggie noticed the way Mavis held the baby close, her lips brushing the child's forehead with a possessiveness that felt off. One rainy evening, Maggie walked in on her sister whispering to the baby, "You're safe now, sweetheart. I won't let anyone take you." When Mavis noticed her, she quickly smiled. Just calming her down, she said. But something in her voice was trembling. That night, Maggie couldn't sleep. Every time the baby stirred, she imagined Mavis's whisper in the dark. By spring, the small cracks in Maggie's peace had widened. Her husband began spending more time at work, claiming overtime at the lumber yard, leaving her alone with her doubts. Friends came by, laughing, calling her paranoid new mom. But the laughter faded when a family friend, Paula Coffey, mentioned something strange over coffee. You know, Mavis once told me she was trying some kind of private adoption, Paula said absent-mindedly. But it fell through. She never talked about it again. The mug in Maggie's hand froze midair. When was this? She asked. Paula frowned, trying to recall. Last year, I think. She said she'd finally found a way to become a mother. The words landed like a hammer. Maggie smiled politely, but her hands shook as she washed the dishes afterward. That night, she stood in the nursery doorway, watching her baby sleep. The small chest rising and falling. The faint gray eyes visible even in the dim glow of the nightlight. She remembered the hospital's soft lullaby, the scent of antiseptic and her sister's perfume mingling with it. She pulled out the photo again, the one she'd noticed before. There was Mavis, standing by the nursery doors, her purse slung low, her gaze fixed on something just out of frame. Maggie zoomed in and caught the small detail she'd missed before, a blue tag in Mavis's hand, identical to the one they'd attached to newborn wrists. Her heart pounded. She wanted to dismiss it again, to tell herself it was a trick of memory. But the seed of doubt had grown into something restless, alive. The next morning, Mavis arrived with groceries and that same bright smile. I thought I'd make lasagna for lunch, she said, walking straight to the kitchen like she lived there. Maggie couldn't look her in the eye. As the baby cooed in her bassinet, Mavis bent to kiss her forehead. Aren't you just perfect? She whispered. Her hands lingered too long. Maggie's voice came out quieter than she intended. You've been around here a lot lately. Mavis blinked, feigning surprise. I'm your sister Maggie. Who else would help you? You sure you're not helping yourself? The room went still. Mavis straightened, her face soft but unreadable. You're tired, she said, brushing invisible crumbs off the counter. You need rest. When she left, Maggie locked the door behind her and pressed her back against it, trembling. For the first time since giving birth, she didn't feel safe in her own home. She sat on the couch holding her baby, whispering to herself, I'm not crazy. I know my child. But deep down, she feared the truth she was inching toward. Because if her suspicion was right, if Mavis had truly done something unthinkable, then everything, every hug, every I'm proud of you, every comforting word in that hospital room, was a lie. And the person who had stood by her bedside, pretending to comfort her after birth, might have been the one who took her child away. By late summer, the unease had hardened into dread. Maggie Padilla had grown pale and restless, her smile a mask stretched too thin. The baby, little Adeline as they'd named her, was 8 months old now, giggling, teething and full of life. But every time Maggie looked into those gray eyes, she felt like she was staring into a stranger's soul. Adariz noticed her drifting. You need to get out more, he said one morning, pouring coffee at the kitchen counter. Join the mothers group at church. You're overthinking everything. Overthinking, that word clung to her like a curse. The breaking point came one cold Tuesday in September. Adeline developed a sudden fever that wouldn't break. The pediatrician at Raleigh Family Health Clinic ordered a few tests, including a genetic panel, for potential hereditary markers. Maggie didn't think much of it, until the doctor called 3 days later. Mrs. Padilla, Dr. Hansen said gently, we need to verify a few things. The DNA results don't seem to match your file. What do you mean? Maggie asked, gripping the phone. There's no genetic link between the child and either parent listed. It's likely a clerical mix-up, but we'll rerun the test. The world tilted. Adariz came home that night to find her sitting on the kitchen floor, the phone in her lap. Her eyes were vacant. She told him what the doctor had said, expecting him to hold her, to promise they'd figure it out together. Instead, his face went cold. Are you saying this baby isn't mine? He whispered. I'm saying something's wrong. Maybe the hospital made a mistake. His voice rose. Or maybe you made one. Her heart dropped. Adariz no, but he was already walking away. That night he slept on the couch, and the silence between them was louder than any argument. Within days, the whispers started. The nurse who lived down the street mentioned seeing police at the hospital last month for record irregularities. Maggie's mother-in-law called, her tone laced with suspicion. "Sweetheart, maybe you should tell us the truth before the test results come back again." The humiliation was suffocating. At the grocery store, she felt eyes on her. In church, she heard murmurs behind pews. And through it all, Mavis was there, offering gentle hugs, cooking meals, whispering comfort like poison in honey. "Maybe it's a lab error," she said sweetly, patting Maggie's hand. "You know how hospitals mix things up." But Maggie saw it now. The faint smirk, the flash of relief in her eyes, whenever Maggie's voice cracked. It was at that moment she remembered the photograph, the blue tag, the nursery door, the timing. A plan began to form. That evening, after putting the baby to sleep, she pulled out the hospital paperwork. She noticed something odd. The newborn bracelet tag in the keepsake box had a faint scratch, like the number had been rewritten. The handwriting on the hospital form, for the baby's ID, looked slightly different from the nurse's signature on other documents. Her heart pounded, as she called St. Francis Women's Medical Center, and requested access to her patient records and maternity footage. The hospital's tone grew defensive, telling her the tapes were archived, and not easily retrievable. But Maggie wasn't the same frightened woman who had clung to her sister's words. She threatened to go to the press. 2 weeks later, she sat alone in the hospital's records room, watching silent footage on an old monitor. Her palms grew clammy, as the timestamp blinked, 3:47 a.m., January 16th. There was Mavis, standing near the nursery, purse in hand. The nurse stepped away to answer a ringing phone, and then, clear as daylight, Mavis leaned over the bassinets. One quick movement, then she walked out, eyes straight to the camera, almost daring someone to stop her. Maggie's breath hitched. The room seemed to close in. She played it again, and again, and again, every replay carved humiliation deeper into her bones. The woman who had held her hand through labor had stolen her blood. That night, when Eris came home, Maggie showed him the footage. His face went white. "My God," he whispered. She actually." Maggie nodded, tears streaming down her face. "She pretended to comfort me after birth, Eris. She was already planning this." He dropped to his knees, clutching her hand, shame washing over him. But forgiveness wouldn't come yet, not easily. The next morning, Maggie made one decision. She wouldn't call the police. Not yet. She would make her sister confess, with her own mouth, on her own camera, because humiliation had been her prison. Now, it would become her sister's. She bought a small camera online for $249 and placed it discreetly behind a vase in her dining room. She rehearsed her words, her tone, her tears. She wouldn't scream or accuse. She'd play the fool one last time, just long enough for Mavis to hang herself with her own guilt. The stage was set, and for the first time in months, Maggie slept soundly, because the storm she was about to unleash would be quiet, surgical and unforgettable. The next Saturday, Maggie Padilla stood in her kitchen, her hand steady as she arranged 2 wine glasses on the table. Outside, autumn sunlight drifted through the windows, painting golden lines across the hardwood floor. The house smelled of rosemary and roast chicken, comforting, familiar, deliberate. It was the perfect scene for reconciliation. At least, that's what Mavis Schaefer would believe. When Maggie had called 2 nights earlier, her voice had sounded fragile, tearful. "Mavis," she'd said softly. "I'm sorry for snapping lately. Everything's been too much. Can you come by for dinner? I need my sister." And Mavis, so sure of her power, had agreed. By 7, her silver Lexus rolled up the drive. She stepped out in a navy coat and heels, carrying a bouquet. "Peace lilies," she said as she handed them over, "for calm energy." Maggie smiled faintly. Perfect choice. Inside, candles flickered. A soft instrumental record played from the corner. The little camera, no bigger than a lighter, was hidden behind the vase of lilies, its red light blinking softly. They sat down to eat. Conversation flowed like honey, smooth, slow, carefully stirred. Mavis talked about her husband, her work at the county office, her new landscaping project. Maggie listened, nodding, pretending to sip wine she'd barely touched. After dessert, Maggie leaned back in her chair. "Do you ever think about that night at St. Francis?" Mavis's fork paused midair. "Which night?" "The night Adeline was born." Mavis gave a polite smile. Of course, how could I forget? I was there through all of it. Maggie's eyes stayed on her. You really were, weren't you? A flicker barely visible crossed Mavis's face. A blink too long, a swallow too quick. What's this about, Mag? Maggie's tone softened, almost tender. Do you remember the nursery? I do. I remember waking up and you were gone for a while. I thought maybe you'd gone to get coffee. Mavis set down her glass. You're imagining things. You were under medication. I watched the footage, Maggie said quietly. Silence. Mavis blinked once, twice. Then laughed. A shaky, too bright sound. Footage, Maggie? There's no footage. Hospitals don't just hand that out, they do, Maggie said, her voice low. When you threaten to call the press, they do. The air thickened. Outside, a branch scraped the window like a warning. Mavis's hands began to tremble. You don't know what you saw. I saw you near the bassinets, Maggie continued, her eyes glistening but unflinching. I saw you touch them. I saw you switch the name tags. Mavis's voice broke. You don't understand. I couldn't. Then help me. Maggie whispered. Help me understand. The sister's composure shattered. She buried her face in her hands. I couldn't live with everyone pitying me. You had everything, the house, the baby. I thought if I could just have one thing, just one, I could breathe again. Maggie didn't move. Her tears fell soundlessly. You took my blood, she said. You watched me suffer. You let them call me a liar. My husband left our bed. My name burned through this town. And you said nothing. I thought you'd never find out, Mavis cried. It was supposed to stay buried. You have no idea what it's like to be empty. Maggie's expression softened, almost pitying. You're right. I don't know emptiness like yours. But I do know what it's like to hold a child that isn't mine and love her anyway. Mavis looked up, eyes wide and wet. Please, don't ruin me. Maggie stood, collected the plates with mechanical calm, and spoke without looking at her. You did that yourself. The hidden camera caught every word, every tear, every excuse. When Mavis finally left, shaking and hollow, Maggie sat alone at the table, staring at the still wine in her glass. Her reflection stared back, tired, pale, but unbroken. She reached over and stopped the recording. Then she whispered the words that had lived in her throat since the night of the birth. She pretended to comfort me after birth. Then I found proof my baby wasn't mine. Her revenge wasn't violent. It was quiet, precise, public. By morning, that footage, uploaded anonymously to a local parent forum, spread like wildfire. The title read, Sister Confesses to Swapping Babies at St. Francis Hospital. Within hours it hit every social feed in Raleigh. By noon, reporters camped outside Mavis's house. Her husband Dario Schaefer stormed out mid-interview, shouting that he'd been living with a liar. The county office suspended her. Her friends unfriended her in droves. The woman who once prided herself on composure now hid behind drawn curtains, humiliated before the same community that once envied her. And Maggie? She didn't smile. Not yet. Justice wasn't triumph, it was release. And release, she learned, came slow and quiet, like the closing of a door. By Monday morning, Raleigh couldn't stop talking. The video had hit every major feed: Facebook, Reddit threads, local mom groups. Headline after headline screamed across the internet. County clerk confesses to baby swap in viral footage. Mavis Schaefer's carefully crafted life crumbled in a single weekend. Her husband Dario packed his suitcase in silence, while reporters gathered at the end of their driveway. The county office where she worked for 11 years suspended her without pay. The same neighbors who once envied her rose garden now crossed the street to avoid her. Inside her home, she sat curled on the couch, eyes red, scrolling through endless comments. Monster. Sociopath. Sister from hell. Each one cut deeper. She called Maggie's phone twice that morning. No answer. Meanwhile, across town, Maggie Padilla sat in the nursery rocking her real daughter, the child who had been living under Mavis's roof. The hospital, under investigation, had expedited the DNA confirmations and custody process. The reunion had been surreal. The first time Maggie held her real baby, she broke down in the hospital hallway, sobbing into her palms. Argy's stood beside her, guilt etched into every line on his face. I should have believed you, he whispered. Maggie didn't answer right away. When she finally spoke, her voice was calm. You will next time. At the police station, Mavis was booked under charges of child abduction, evidence tampering, and falsifying medical documents. Cameras flashed as she was led inside in a gray coat, her head bowed. One of the officers, an older man, muttered, "It's always the ones who look composed." The humiliation wasn't loud, it was endless. In court weeks later, Mavis stood trembling as the prosecutor played snippets of her confession. Every sniffle, every "I couldn't live like that," echoed through the chamber. The judge's gavel fell like thunder. Maggie didn't attend every hearing, only the last. She sat in the back row, dressed in pale blue, her face expressionless. When Mavis turned to meet her eyes, there was no anger there anymore, just a haunting quiet. Afterward, reporters swarmed her outside the courthouse. "Mrs. Padilla, do you forgive your sister?" one shouted. She paused on the courthouse steps, her baby sleeping in her arms, the autumn wind tugging at her hair. "Forgiveness isn't for her," she said softly. "It's for me." Her words trended for 3 days straight. Months passed. The noise faded. The sister's story became a cautionary tale whispered in family circles, a reminder that betrayal doesn't always wear the face of an enemy. By Christmas, the Padilla home was filled again with laughter. Herbes had rebuilt the crib himself, sanding every corner as if repentance could be carved into wood. He and Maggie moved slow, careful, learning to be gentle again. One quiet night, as the snow fell outside, Maggie sat beside the crib. The room glowed with warm lamplight, the baby's tiny fingers curled around her own. She whispered, "You'll never know the storm we came through, but I'll make sure you grow where love lives." A tear slid down her cheek, but this time it wasn't from grief, it was from peace. She picked up her journal, the one she'd begun in the hospital, and wrote the closing line for her story. "She pretended to comfort me after birth. Then I found proof my baby wasn't mine. But in the end, I learned something no betrayal could take away. The truth doesn't need to shout, it just needs to be shown." The camera of her life had stopped rolling long ago, but the lesson lingered etched into every mother who watched her story unfold. Every sister who thought envy could be hidden, and every soul who learned that real revenge isn't destruction, it's dignity. And Maggie Padilla wore hers like armor.